There we go. Good morning and welcome to Zip Over to Zack's. My name is Zack Polanski. I'm the third candidate on the London Assembly list for the Green Party, supporting the amazing work of Sean Berry and Caroline Russell. For those who haven't seen the show before, and why not, we've been here every week. Every week we take big global issues and we make them relatable. So we've talked about the climate emergency, we often talk about transport. Last week we talked about youth services, and a couple of weeks ago we talked about Black Lives Matter, the importance of representation and diversity in politics and generally in the community, and particularly with a focus on the arts. This week we're talking about a really sensitive and important subject. I'm going to introduce that in a moment. Just before we get there, I want to talk about what's been happening in the news recently. And yesterday, Dr. David Nabarro, who works for the World Health Organization, the envoy for Europe, was talking about London and coronavirus, and said actually that the risk to London is still extremely serious. Now, I don't want it to be doom mongering, and I want us to get back out there as quickly as possible, as much as the next person. But it's clear that we all have to take responsibility in terms of making sure we're washing our hands regularly, wearing masks. But also, this cannot be about blaming certain sections of the population or young people or people from ethnic minorities. This has to be about everyone taking their part, and crucially, about clear guidance from the government. I think it's not unfair to say they've been all over the place with this. Now, we were willing to support them as much as we could do at the beginning. We accept that, we didn't see the virus coming, although of course some people did. But actually, there was going to be a reasonable amount of uncertainty with this. But we've got to the point now where actually you really should be planning and communicating properly. Now, the Mayor of London, who it's our job to hold him accountable, and very often we're in opposition to him or we're using constructive criticism and support. But with this, I'm with him all the way. He said to Boris Johnson, why have you not informed me that there's even a possibility that the whole of London might have to go back into lockdown, in a kind of localized lockdown for a big area? And apparently Boris Johnson has not been consulting with them at all. That's a completely unacceptable situation. We have an elected mayor and an elected London Assembly, to hold the mayor accountable. And they absolutely need to be at the table in those decisions. And by the way, although I'm a London Assembly candidate, this is not just a London thing. This requires any city around the UK, any major city that has a mayor, certainly needs to be held at the table in those conversations. That seems like a basic principle of democracy and accountability, that those who are affected by the decisions are given a part in those decisions. So that's the kind of latest coronavirus update, and obviously we'll keep you updated on that. But we need the government to do the right thing on this, and we also need to take personal responsibility. Now, shifting gears a little bit, I've spoken about the issues that we've talked about in the past on the show. This issue is something that is extremely sensitive and particularly prevalent at the moment, and that's the issue of domestic abuse. During coronavirus alone, the police have reported that they've been making nearly 100 arrests a day of domestic abuse or domestic violence. On top of that, there's also the issue of our community services and the fact that there's been so little funding, and what little funding there has been slashed even more. And both of these issues kind of come together in kind of a microcosm with an organization called Sistah Space. Now, Sistah Space are a domestic abuse service in Hackney, who are there specifically for African and Caribbean heritage women, women and girls who are there, who are survivors of domestic abuse and violence. And I'm delighted that we have the CEO of Sistah Space, who is Rosanna Lewis, or Rose Lewis, who's come on the show really to talk about a lot of these issues and maybe other things too. As I said, Rose is the CEO of Sistah Space. She's also a bookseller and she's very active in the community. So we're really honoured to have her on the show. And good morning, Rose.
Good morning. Hi.
So just to begin, with what exactly has been happening in Sistah Space, I got a lot of my information from Twitter, and obviously that's a very muddled kind of form of it. So do you want to kind of in a nutshell tell us what's going on?
Like at this present moment, we are quote unquote negotiating with Hackney Council and the Mayor to stay at the present venue that we're at. We've been given until the 31st of this month, and they reckon it's all about signing a license to remain where we are and to be on par with everybody else who wants to bid for the place where we're at. It's all very muddled, indeed. It really is. So basically last year, Hackney said that they were going to fix up the space we were in Lower Clapton. And whilst they were fixing it, a one room shop front property where we had a lot of issues for the past 5 years, 6 years. So they said they were going to do up this property, and we've gone into a temporary property, which is the one that we're in now. In June, we were told that we had to move back to this one room shop front unsafe property, but that was during the pandemic. It was literally the first phase of the pandemic that we were told we had to move back. And we said, well, we can't do that because African heritage people, or what they call BAME, Black and minority ethnic people, had a very high rate of catching COVID, etc. So we said, well, we shouldn't be moving. Central government says to stay put, but local government wanted us to move back, and everything spiraled from there. They kept on saying, well, we've done up the place, and in Lower Clapton, and we spent £35,000 on this place. And you said you would go back, and you need to go back. And you said you go back, and £35,000, that's the only narrative that Hackney and the mayor keep talking about. I'll be honest, they haven't really spoken to us. They haven't tried to negotiate with us. They haven't tried to even find out exactly what we were saying. And we were saying, and all we've been saying is that we need a safe space. We need a safe space for African heritage women, which is like African Caribbean women or African women from all over the world. We need a safe space, and for the women, for their lives, for our volunteers, and for our workers. And that's all we've ever asked for, a safe space. And Hackney are not hearing, or maybe they're not listening. So this is where we're at the moment. We had a protest on July the 10th outside the town hall. We were supported by Sisters Uncut, Black Lives Matter, the Renters Union, and a lot of the public came out. Obviously, a lot of it is all of it is to do with domestic abuse, domestic violence, and sexual abuse, and people know it's the right thing to do, and that your local borough are not supporting you. We are currently one of the main, if not only, charity that works strictly with African heritage women and girls suffering from domestic abuse and domestic violence. And we're just saying we need a safe space. The last property that we're at, it's a shop front, and you literally, if a perpetrator wanted to come to the property to do what, say whatever they wanted to, or do whatever they wanted to, they could just kick down that front door. This is how dangerous this place is. We've told Hackney Council that for years, as I mentioned before, but there are a lot of issues that is just not right. It's not correct for the lives and well-beings of African heritage women and girls.
I'm so sorry this has been happening to you. I think it's pretty impossible to listen to that story and not hear how there's so many elements there that are totally unacceptable anyway, particularly anyone who's been suffering from domestic abuse and violence. But on top of that, there's a council and a mayor that just aren't listening. I think the thing that really stuck out that you said was, we just want a safe space.
Yes.
I don't think anyone could hear it and not say we don't want a safe space. In our chat, we have, I don't know how to say your founder's name, and I don't want to mispronounce it.
Ngozi.
Ngozi. And Ngozi is in the chat and also saying she's very happy to take any questions if you've got questions. So we've both got Rose here and Ngozi in the chat. Rewinding back a little bit, in terms of Sistah Space, you said there's a particular problem where you need a charity for African and Caribbean heritage women. I can only speak for my community, which is the Jewish community. I know that, for instance, in the Orthodox community, it takes longer for a woman to report domestic abuse and violence, an Orthodox Jew, than a white person. Are the statistics very different for Black and minority ethnic women than a lot of the rest of the population?
Yeah, well, that seems this is why every culture has their own particular charity or their domestic abuse services, because mainstream do not cater for adequately or enough or put or prioritize other ethnicities. This is why we had to set up Sistah Space, because we didn't have anywhere to go to. It is everybody else, every other culture that is out there to help us, that we, you know, that we would go to, but also that make decisions about us, and the majority of them do not have the what's the word? They do not have the expertise of knowing what we need. For example, if a woman who has been through domestic abuse and has to leave where she is, and she's sent to a refuge, there are particular things that we need to help us to heal, to help us to grow, just to help us to get through. So, for example, African heritage women, if we go somewhere and we need cream for our skin, very, very important. And it's just not any kind of cream. You can imagine that you've been through something and you want to make yourself feel good, and you don't have little things like cream for your skin. You don't have the particular types of shampoo and hair products that you need for your hair, because our hair is very distinctive from everybody else, and there's a whole process and quote unquote ritual to go with it. The kind of foods that we eat, as you mentioned, for the Orthodox Jews, there are particular foods that they have to eat. There are particular holidays and celebrations that we have that require certain things, that where you just can't get it, and those are very, very important. Even language is a huge part of it also. But we also have other particular issues where the Windrush generation, you know, they're going through multiple issues. So you've got the whole thing of racism. You've got the whole colonialism. You have got where they have never had a voice about their experiences of domestic violence, domestic abuse, and sexual abuse, and we cater for all those things. There are huge issues with the police, for example, and there's the whole historical thing of the relationship between the police and African heritage community. There's the issue of the police and our young boys and men. You know about the high rate of arrests, of stop and search, of back in the day when it used to be sus, where you could just a suspicion, the police just have a suspicion, which they've brought back in another way. There's all that, and then there's reporting to the police, and there's all the stereotypes and the myths that they have about Black women, African heritage women, the myth of being the strong woman, the myth of being aggressive when you try to assert yourself, the myth that we have broken families and this is why this happens. There's also just using all the services, and there's, as we know, was it the Macpherson report just spoke about just the inherent systemic racism that goes right across the board, and all those things actually have a huge impact on the service that we receive. And just for us just reporting the abuses that we've suffered, just going to report it is a huge issue. It's like, do I go and report it? And if I do, maybe my immigration status will be brought up. It's there is just so much, very complex, but the issues are not addressed to the rate that it should be. And we at Sistah Space, we address all those issues. And in saying that, when we do address it, it's like a lot of the organizations are not forthcoming about it. And that raises other issues. There are issues also within VWAG, which is the acronym in violence against women and girls. There are even issues within that also. We're not finding that, you know, the unity that we feel that should be there, and they addressing and having a transparent conversation about the issues that we go through. We're not finding that also. And interesting enough, just little things, well, it's big things to us, and it's very, very important to us. Just on Saturday, the Emancipation Day was celebrated, and the Emancipation, I don't know if you're aware about the Emancipation Day, 1st of August, every year celebrated, and nobody addresses that, and nobody has put it up on the events calendar, that this is a very important celebration for the African heritage community. Yeah, it's all so much little things, but when you put them all together, it has a huge impact on how we can put forward all this information we have, and how it links in with everything that we do as an African heritage community.
Absolutely, and just with it being complex, I agree, it's highly complex. On Sunday, actually, our Green Party councillor, Scott Ainsley, went down with some Green Party members in solidarity for the Emancipation Day, and absolutely agree that...
Oh, okay.
But everyone needs to do more, though, and I think, you know, putting that out there. I know something Sian Berry, our candidate for mayor on the London Assembly, has been doing, getting a commitment from the mayor that refuges should be included in the housing plan, because obviously we have a housing crisis in London, and the people who are worst hit by that are often women and vulnerable women. We've actually got a question in the chat from Aileen Gonzalez, who was a guest on our show a few weeks ago, actually. And she's saying, do children stay with their mothers in the refuge, and do you get support with them?
Well, we currently, we don't have a refuge at the moment. And again, this is one of a huge factor, that there is not an African heritage refuge. Black women we're just not catered for in the refuges, in the refuge. But yes, in answer to the question, yes, children do stay, and they should be allowed to stay. But even in the refuge, we're just not, our needs are not catered for by the workers. Most of it is because the people who run it, they themselves are not, they don't do their research. They're just not forward thinking in it. I think it's not a patch job, but their main concern is to help the women with what they want. But sometimes it doesn't work because the women, like I said about, things like our skin, our hair, even seeing professionals that look like you and being able to talk and be treated by people that look like you can make a huge difference in the way that survivors heal. So we at Sistah Space, this is one of the things that we're working on in terms of getting a refuge for African heritage women and girls. That is just so important. But because people like the Hackney Council and the mayor and all that don't want to speak to us directly, they wouldn't know the kind of things that we want to do and why we want to do it, although it's public knowledge, but to have a conversation about it. So this fighting that we're doing to have this safe space would also include thoughts and processes to get a refuge, which is so important. Nowhere in Britain do we have a Black or African centered refuge for women, but yet the statistics for African heritage women and domestic violence, domestic abuse and sexual abuse is very, very high. And we have not even touched on the young people and what they're going through. We hear about the grooming that's happening generally. We know there's all the propaganda and everything that it's mainly Black people that is, that are in gangs and the violence that's going on, etc. But there is a whole culture that's going on with young people and domestic violence and domestic abuse and domestic abuse and sexual abuse, And whilst I'm speaking, one of the things that we find all the time, and we consistently speak out about it, it's not very well received, but a lot more people are talking about it, is the whole issue of BAME. I mentioned it before, Black and minority ethnic. It used to be, it's BAME, there was BAME, and then there was another one which just escapes my mind just for a moment. But
it makes it difficult. The word BAME suggests that white is the mainstream and the normal, and everyone else is in one group. Where it's obviously
that's right. Yeah.
Not a homogeneous group.
Yeah, they've got them, and also it goes across class as well, because it's the middle class that's also in one in one category also. So it is race and it is class, but we also find that when we're all lumped together, it also has an impact on the way that the funding goes as well. So the grassroots community are trying to do something. The African community is trying to do something, and we're lumped into BAME. Anybody who has the title Black will get the money, because it's assumed that they're working with Black people. We know it's a political term, but that means that they get the money and we do not get the money. And what it does, it actually kind of divides and pits us against each other, and all the different groups are really struggling to get funding and to get recognition and so on. And so it's quite divisive, and that's not how it should be, because I assume in the white and in the middle class sectors of BAME, they do not have to do that, and we shouldn't need to do that neither.
Absolutely. So really sadly, we're running out of time. I could talk about this all day because you speak beautifully about it. I imagine anyone watching this who's a Green member, voter or supporter will be absolutely convinced by your arguments and hear what you're saying and want to help. It's a big question to finish off with, but how can we help? What do you need from people? I know, how can we help?
First and foremost, we are just ever so ever so grateful for everybody of every culture, every gender, etc., who are supporting us. And what do we need? We need for people to spread the word. We need for people to to sign our petition. We need, if we're possible, for people to go to our GoFundMe page to help us, because now we obviously have to be looking at you know, getting our own space if Hackney continues not to hear us and not to help us and not to let us stay in this space that we are currently at, so that we can continue the work. We've had amazing support with people doing all kinds of events, all kinds of fundraising activities, etc. And just to let people know, just because we are an African heritage charity, we do not embrace everybody who would like to help, who would like to talk to us, etc. So it's really just about signing our petition, helping with our GoFundMe, which they can find on all our social medias, and that I know I've missed out something, but I can't think of it at the moment. But yeah, that's what would be good. And also, I really want to give a huge, massive thank you to so many people who sends their support for us, everybody, and we will in time get to do something, and thank everyone personally. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose, for coming on. As I say, it's been an honour and really interesting to chat to you, and hopefully there's been an education for people too. I also see Ngosi's writing in the chat that people must always call out misogyny and racism whenever they see it. Yeah, absolutely, we can all take responsibility for that. Again, thank you so much for coming on. If you want to find out more about Sistah Space, and I really encourage you to, you can find them at Twitter at Sistah, and Sistah is spelled Sistah.
Yeah.
Sistah Space. Go on there and you can find out more information. Thank you so much all for watching, and I will see you all next week. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.